The desert wind carried dust across the hills of Jerusalem, a whisper of time brushing against stone. 3,000 years have passed, yet the question still echoes through history: how did King Solomon build the impossible temple? A structure of unimaginable scale, crafted in an age without cranes, pulleys, or iron machinery, and yet its stones were cut with such precision that even today, a human hair cannot fit between them. It was not just a building. It was a paradox. A temple so vast, so perfect, that modern engineers still stare at its ruins and shake their heads in disbelief. They call it Solomon's Temple, but in truth, it was something far greater. It was a challenge to the limits of human ingenuity, faith, and divine inspiration. In the ancient world, kingdoms rose and fell by the sword. But Solomon's reign was different. Peace had come to Israel after decades of war under his father, David. The land was prosperous, the people, united, and amid that peace, the young king received a command that would define his life. Greater than, "Behold, I have chosen a place for my name to dwell." That was the voice Solomon could never forget, a divine instruction to build a dwelling place for the presence of God himself. No ordinary palace could serve that purpose. What Solomon envisioned was something humanity had never seen, a house worthy of the creator of the universe. But how does one build perfection with human hands? Solomon's mind became a forge of divine ambition. The temple had to rise on Mount Moriah, the same hill where Abraham once raised a knife over Isaac, the place where faith and obedience met eternity. He summoned the greatest architects, the wisest engineers, the most skilled artisans from across Israel and Phoenicia. The project began not with celebration, but with silence, because even in planning, Solomon knew he was walking the edge between the possible and the divine. Blueprints were drawn not on parchment but in the sand, erased and redrawn with each gust of wind. Every dimension had to be perfect, 40 cubits long, 20 wide, and 30 high. The Holy of Holies at the center, a cubic chamber of cedar and gold. But perfection demands sacrifice. Solomon's command spread across the kingdom. Greater than, "Prepare me great and costly stones for the foundation." That sentence would awaken an army of 150,000 men, stonecutters, carriers, overseers, each one bound to a task that would take 7 years to complete, and for many, a lifetime to recover from. The quarries opened at dawn. The air trembled with heat. The first challenge was simple to imagine, impossible to execute: the foundation stones. Each block would weigh hundreds of tons, some as heavy as a fully loaded passenger jet. They were to be cut from solid mountain rock, shaped, transported, and fitted into place without the sound of a single iron tool. That command came straight from Scripture, 1 Kings 6:7. Greater than, the temple, when it was being built, was built with stone finished at the quarry, so that no hammer or chisel or any iron tool was heard while it was being built. Imagine the scale of that silence. Thousands of men working, yet not a single strike of metal echoing across Mount Moriah. The Temple of Peace had to be built without the instruments of war. But how does one shape a mountain without sound? Archaeologists today still debate the mystery. The stones that remain, massive, smooth, perfectly joined, bear no marks of chisels or saws. Ancient texts describe a technique both ingenious and hauntingly primitive. Workers would carve shallow grooves into the rock, then drill small holes along the intended fracture line. Into those holes, they inserted wedges of dry wood. Water was poured over the wedges, and the wood began to swell. Slowly, over hours or days, the rock would crack, not with a violent explosion, but with a soft, muffled sigh. The earth itself split open at their command. This was not brute force, it was patience turned into power. Each block that broke free had to be shaped with mathematical precision. One mistake, one uneven edge, and weeks of labor were wasted. The stones were marked with symbols that acted as secret instructions, a code known only to the master builders. These marks would later guide their placement in Jerusalem, ensuring every block found its destined place, silently. But even as the first stones emerged, a darker truth followed. Solomon's temple was a monument of divine vision, but it was also a machine of human suffering. Tens of thousands of men worked under the burning sun, day after day. Israelites served in rotation, 1 month on duty, 2 at home. But the Canaanites, the conquered laborers, had no such privilege. For them, the quarry was both workplace and prison. Their days began before dawn. Their reward was a few grains of barley, a cup of water, and the hope to survive until sunset. The mountain echoed with the rhythm of breath and strain, ropes tightening, wood creaking, stone cracking. Every sound, except the forbidden clang of metal. Accidents were constant. A rope snapped, a block slipped. Men vanished beneath the weight of stone. There were no names recorded, no graves marked. Only dust and silence remained where lives once struggled. And still, the work continued. Because the king had commanded it, and the king's word was law. Far above the quarries, Solomon watched from his palace terrace. The city stretched beneath him, a sea of tents, workshops, furnaces, and scaffolds. To the west, cedar logs floated ashore from Lebanon, forming rafts so large they seemed to carry forests across the sea. Solomon's partnership with Hiram, king of Tyre, had secured what Israel lacked, the sacred cedar, fragrant, incorruptible, strong as steel. It was the wood of eternity, destined to line the walls of the holy place. Hiram's men were masters of the axe and saw, but they too knew the silence of reverence. For each log felled in the forests of Lebanon, a prayer was whispered, for the house of the Lord. Thousands of miles of transport awaited those timbers. Across rivers, mountains, and deserts, every piece of wood was a journey of faith. In the heat of midday, the quarries roared with effort. Great ramps of packed earth were built, slopes that wound like serpents across the hillsides. On them, the colossal stones were placed atop thick wooden rollers. 100 men to a single rope. Another 100 behind, pushing, guiding, praying. Pull. Stop. Reposition. Pull again. The supervisor's chants rose and fell like a ritual. Each block moved inches at a time, its weight pressing into the soil, carving its own path through history. When night came, the men did not return home. They slept beside the stones, guarding them like sacred relics. Fires flickered against the mountainsides, and shadows danced across the raw faces of half-shaped boulders, ghosts of a workforce building something they barely understood. Some said the temple would bring them closer to God. Others whispered that no man could raise such a thing without the help of angels. By the second year of construction, the mountain of Moriah began to change shape. The ground was leveled, and the first foundation stones arrived. Each was lowered into place with the precision of a surgeon's hand. The stones didn't just fit, they merged, as if grown together. No mortar, no binding. Only the weight of perfection holding them still. Today, modern engineers who have studied these ancient blocks confess the same bewilderment. Greater than, even with our cranes and cutting tools, moving a 400-ton stone with millimeter precision is nearly impossible, says one. But 3,000 years ago, men did it with ropes, wood, and will. As the base took shape, the temple's blueprint expanded, walls to rise 30 cubits high, overlaid with gold, with bronze columns at the entrance named Jashan and Boaz. The plans defied not only the limits of the era but the logic of human endurance. Yet Solomon never doubted. To him, this was not merely architecture, it was worship in physical form. Every stone, every beam, every droplet of gold was an offering. He would often walk among the laborers in disguise, listening, watching, understanding the pulse of his creation. The men didn't recognize him. To them, he was just another overseer walking through the dust, whispering instructions in a calm, steady tone. He saw the blood, the exhaustion, the faith. He saw men pushing themselves beyond human limits. And perhaps in those moments, Solomon understood that building a house for God was also a test of what it meant to be human. By the end of the 4th year, the temple's foundation stood complete. A vast stone platform, silent and unyielding, bathed in sunlight. It was said that when the wind blew across its surface, the stones sang, a low, resonant hum, like the breath of the earth itself. Priests came to bless the ground. Sacrifices were made, trumpets sounded, and the people bowed. But for the workers, it was only the beginning. The hardest part was still to come, raising the walls, transporting the cedar beams, overlaying everything with gold. And all of it, in silence. As the last foundation stone was set, one of the old quarry masters looked toward the horizon and murmured, "Greater than, we have built the bones of a God's house. But to make it live, we will need more than stone." He was right, because what came next would turn the mountain of stone into a furnace of light. Dash dash dash. The sun sank over Jerusalem, and the city glowed like embers beneath a crimson sky. Solomon stood alone on his balcony, gazing toward the sacred mount. The air trembled with heat, but in his heart, he felt only the cold weight of responsibility. In 7 years, he had promised a house for God. In 7 years, his name would be written in eternity, or forgotten in dust. And as night fell, a voice seemed to echo in the silence. Greater than, build it for my name, not for yours. The king closed his eyes. The work would continue at dawn. The sun rose over the hills of Jerusalem like molten bronze, spilling light across the half-built temple. From a distance, the sight looked alive, hundreds of men moving as one, ropes stretching, dust rising, the rhythm of labor pulsing like a heartbeat. But step closer, and the sound that met you was not noise, it was silence. Asterisk. No hammer. No iron. Only the whisper of wind, the groan of wood, the slow rumble of stone against earth. Because this was not an ordinary construction. This was God's house. And no sound of metal, the symbol of war and blood, could defile the air where holiness would dwell. That silence, strange and sacred, was the temple's first miracle. Dash dash dash. Every man on that mountain had a purpose. The Israelites, working in rotation, 1 month of labor, 2 months of rest. The Canaanites, bound in servitude, no rest, no release. And above them all, 3,300 overseers, men with eyes sharp as eagles, ensuring every order was obeyed, every stone measured, every silence kept. There was discipline, almost like an army. No worker could speak above a whisper. No one could act without command. And those who broke the law of silence faced punishment, harsh, immediate, and unforgettable. For 7 years, the temple would rise not with sound, but with precision and fear. Dash dash dash. The quarries of Jerusalem never slept. At dawn, men lined up to carry ropes, levers, and wooden rollers. The smell of sweat mixed with dust and cedar. Supervisors marked names on clay tablets, attendance was not optional. And when the first light touched the stone, the chants began. Pull, hold, steady, each word a prayer, each breath a sacrifice. To cut the stones was one kind of danger. To move them was another. The process was brutal and beautiful at once, like watching an entire mountain shift beneath human hands. Thick ropes of twisted hemp wrapped around stones the size of houses. Wooden rollers, polished with oil, turned beneath the impossible weight. Men pulled in perfect rhythm, 100 voices breathing as one body. A single mistake, and the mountain turned predator. A snapped rope became a death sentence. A rolling stone crushed everything in its path. There were no screams, only silence, followed by the slow, sickening sound of the earth settling again. The dead were buried where they fell. The living simply stepped over them and pulled again. The temple would not wait for grief. Dash dash dash. Solomon knew this. From his palace, he could see the trails carved by the transport teams, scars of effort winding through the valleys. He also knew what they cost. Each month, reports reached him. 3 carriers dead in the valley of Ajalon. Asterisk. A ramp collapsed near Gibeon. Asterisk. A quarryman crushed under his own block. Asterisk. Solomon would read them in silence. He would close his eyes, whisper a prayer, and issue another order to continue. To stop was unthinkable. He was not building for himself. He was building for eternity. Dash dash dash. And eternity demanded wood as well as stone. The forests of Lebanon, vast, ancient, and perfumed, held the cedar that would line the inner walls of the temple. King Hiram of Tyre had made an oath with Solomon. His people would cut, shape, and ship the trees. In return, Solomon would send them wheat, oil, and gold. It was a partnership of kings, one bound by faith, and another by commerce. But the work in Lebanon was no less dangerous. The cedar giants stood hundreds of feet tall. Men scaled them with ropes and axes, striking blows that echoed like thunder through the valleys. When the trees finally fell, the ground shook as if the heavens themselves had sighed. The logs were bound together into massive rafts and floated across the Mediterranean, guided by small ships and the courage of men who understood the sea's temper. Storms tore ropes apart. Many never made it to the port of Joppa. But for every log lost to the waves, another was sent. Because the command was clear. Greater than, the house of the Lord must rise. From Joppa, the cedar was hauled 60 kilometers inland, through desert, dust, and rock, using the same brutal method as the stones. It was a pilgrimage of wood and willpower. Each log rolled forward by sheer human strength. Cedar cracked, ropes frayed, men collapsed. But still, they pulled. When a log finally reached Jerusalem, it was a victory in itself, celebrated not with feasts but with the quiet satisfaction of survival. As the structure began to take form, a new figure entered the story, Hiram the craftsman, a man unlike any other. He was the son of a Phoenician metalworker and an Israelite widow, born with hands that understood both the sacred and the scientific. It was said he could make bronze flow like water and gold breathe like fire. Solomon summoned him personally. When Hiram arrived in Jerusalem, he stood before the half-built temple, a skeleton of stone and cedar, and said only one thing. Greater than, it will shine like the sun. And Solomon smiled. Then make it so. Under Hiram's direction, the furnaces were lit. Great pits dug into the earth blazed with heat. Copper, tin, and gold were melted into rivers of light. Men with faces blackened by soot hammered the glowing metal into sheets thin as leaves. Each sheet was carried up the temple slope, cooled, and then beaten flat against cedar walls until they shimmered like mirrors. 27 tons of gold. Enough to buy entire kingdoms. All poured into the house of one God. Every strike of the hammer, though forbidden on the mount, echoed far away, deep in the forges of the valley. The workers said the flames never died. Even at midnight, the horizon pulsed with the reflection of gold being born. Meanwhile, the outer structure rose in silence. Stone by stone, wall by wall, the builders moved with precision that defied belief. Each block, carved and marked in the quarries, arrived ready to fit, perfectly. No adjusting, no correction. Archaeologists who later examined the remnants said it was as if the entire structure had been pre-assembled elsewhere and simply placed on the mount. They found no gaps, no binding agents, no misalignments. It was impossible, unless the builders had a system so advanced it bordered on supernatural. Some historians whisper about ancient codes, geometric markings, Hebrew letters, and symbols that dictated position and alignment. A secret architectural language known only to Solomon's master masons. Each mark was both number and prayer. Each stone, a verse in the poem of creation. Inside the temple, the transformation was breathtaking. Cedar walls rose toward the ceiling, engraved with palm trees and cherubim. Gold sheets reflected the flicker of oil lamps, turning darkness into molten light. The scent of fresh wood and burning incense filled the air. It was said that anyone who entered during construction felt their heart tremble, as if unseen eyes were watching, judging, waiting. To work inside was considered an honor. Only the most skilled artisans were allowed to enter the inner chambers. They worked barefoot, in silence, and before touching any material, they washed their hands in bowls of bronze. Every motion was ritual. Every breath was devotion. But not all men understood the holiness of the task. Rumors began to spread among the laborers, whispers of exhaustion, resentment, and rebellion. The Israelites returned home every 2 months. The Canaanites did not. And though the project was sacred, hunger does not bow to holiness. There were fights in the camps. Some refused to work. Others tried to flee into the hills. Those caught were whipped, chained, and brought back to the site. Solomon's overseers recorded everything. Even punishment was measured, ordered, and justified under the king's command. Yet for all the suffering, there was no collapse, no rebellion. Only endurance. Because even those who cursed the king could not deny the awe of what they were building. When the sun struck the half-finished temple at midday, it looked alive, a mountain of gold and cedar gleaming like fire. Even the skeptics bowed their heads. 7 years had passed. And at last, the impossible seemed close to completion. The bronze pillars, Jashan and Boaz, rose at the entrance, 26 feet high, gleaming with engraved pomegranates and lilies. Inside, cherubim carved from olive wood, 15 feet tall, spread their golden wings across the Holy of Holies. Everything spoke of perfection. Everything, except the silence of the king. Solomon no longer smiled. The temple that once filled him with pride now weighed on his soul. He had built glory from stone and fire, but at what cost? He would often walk through the site alone at night, listening to the faint sound of the wind through cedar beams. He would look at his hands, soft, unscarred, and whisper, "Greater than, I built this for you, my Lord. But did I build it the right way?" No answer came. only silence. One night, as the story goes, a great storm swept over Jerusalem. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the unfinished temple like a crown of fire. Workers fled for cover, fearing the structure would collapse. But it didn't. The stones held. The cedar stood firm. And in that moment, Solomon understood. The temple's strength did not lie in human perfection, but in divine purpose. He would finish it, not for glory, not for legacy, but for obedience. The final phase would begin at dawn. The gold was ready. The cedar in place. The foundation unshakable. All that remained was the light. Dawn came quietly over Jerusalem, a soft golden light brushing across the hills, touching the unfinished temple with the warmth of a promise. After 7 long years, the day had arrived. The structure stood complete, a mountain of gold and stone, silent and alive. From a distance, it didn't seem built by hands at all, it looked grown from the earth itself. The walls shimmered in the rising sun, and the twin bronze pillars caught the light like fire trapped in metal. And at the center of it all stood Solomon, no longer just a king, but a man standing on the edge of eternity. The workers gathered at the foot of the mount. Tens of thousands, Israelites, Canaanites, Phoenicians, their faces marked by dust, sweat, and years of labor. They stared at what they had built, hardly believing it was real. The silence broke only when Solomon raised his hand. And with a voice that carried across the valley, he said, "Greater than, this is not the work of men. This is the dwelling place of the Almighty." The crowd fell to their knees. Even the wind seemed to pause. Inside the temple, the air was cool and heavy, thick with the scent of cedar, gold, and oil. The priests moved slowly, almost afraid to breathe too loudly. Every step echoed like thunder against the gold-lined walls. At the far end, behind a veil of fine linen, lay the Holy of Holies, the innermost chamber. No one but the high priest could ever enter it, and only once a year. It was here that the Ark of the Covenant would rest, the same ark carried by Moses through the desert, the symbol of God's presence among his people. And now, after generations of wandering, it would finally have a home. The ark arrived under guard, borne on the shoulders of priests clothed in white linen. It glowed in the torchlight, its golden cherubim facing one another, wings outstretched over the mercy seat. The people fell silent as it approached the steps. The moment was sacred. This was the heart of the temple, the moment heaven and earth would meet. Solomon himself watched as the priests carried the ark through the outer courts, past the golden altar, through the great doors, and into the Holy of Holies. When it was placed beneath the wings of the great olive wood cherubim, the priest stepped back, and waited. What happened next became legend. A low hum filled the air, faint at first, then growing deeper, like thunder beneath the earth. The lamps flickered, the air shimmered, and then, light, pure, blinding light, burst forth from within the inner chamber. It was not fire. It was not sunlight. It was something living. The priests fell to the ground, unable to stand. The people outside saw the light through the great doors, flooding across the courtyard like molten gold. And a voice, not of man, but of eternity, seemed to whisper across the stones. "Greater than, my presence shall dwell here." The Shekinah glory had descended. The temple, once a dream, once an impossible plan, had become the dwelling of God himself. Solomon, overcome, fell to his knees before the altar. His crown slipped from his head, rolling into the dust. With tears streaming down his face, he began to pray, not for himself, not for his throne, but for his people. "Greater than, O Lord, God of Israel. Greater than there is none like you in heaven or on earth. Greater than who keeps covenant and shows mercy to your servants. Greater than the heavens cannot contain you, how much less this house that I have built. Greater than yet look upon it, and hear the prayers made within its walls." The people echoed his prayer with a shout so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations. Smoke rose from the altar, thick and white, twisting upward into the sky like a living thing. And as it rose, a bolt of fire descended from heaven and struck the altar, igniting the sacrifice in a blaze of divine light. The crowd fell on their faces. Solomon remained kneeling, his heart breaking and whole at once. In that moment, the temple was alive. As days turned into weeks, word of the temple spread across nations. Kings and scholars traveled from distant lands to see the impossible house. No one could understand how it had been built. The stones, still perfectly fitted without mortar. The pillars, impossible to cast with the technology of the time. The gold, too pure, too polished to be ancient. It defied logic. It mocked explanation. Greek philosophers later said the temple was made by spirits, not men. Egyptian priests whispered that Solomon had commanded the wind itself. And some claimed Hiram's craftsmen used knowledge that came not from earth, but from beyond it. Modern engineers still puzzle over it. How were the massive stones, weighing hundreds of tons, cut and transported? How did they fit together so perfectly without modern tools? And why are there no records of mistakes, adjustments, or reconstruction? Some say the builders used acoustic levitation, vibrations so precise they could move stone through sound. Others believe ancient Israel inherited knowledge from older civilizations, Atlantis, or the lost builders of Egypt's pyramids. And a few go further, claiming the temple was built with divine geometry, proportions so perfect they resonate with the frequencies of the earth itself. Whatever the truth, the temple remains unmatched. Even the great cathedrals of Europe, even the wonders of Egypt and Mesopotamia, none match its harmony, its mystery, its purpose. Because Solomon's temple was not built just to impress. It was built to connect, heaven to earth, man to God, the finite to the infinite. But glory has a shadow. Years later, as Solomon grew older, his heart began to drift. The man who had once built a house for God began building altars for other gods. The wisdom that had raised the temple became the arrogance that cracked his soul. And as prophecy warned, when faith falls, even stone will crumble. Centuries later, invaders came. First the Babylonians, then the Romans. The temple was plundered, desecrated, burned. The gold melted and ran through the cracks like rivers of fire. All that remained were stones, scattered, silent, and broken. But even in ruins, the legend endured. Because some things cannot be destroyed. Archaeologists have searched for centuries, and still, the exact location of the Holy of Holies remains uncertain. Some believe it lies beneath the dome of the rock, others under the ancient tunnels of the Temple Mount. Every stone in Jerusalem seems to whisper a fragment of the story. And though the temple is gone, the mystery grows larger with every discovery. What technology did Solomon's builders use? Who taught them? And how did a civilization from nearly 3,000 years ago achieve something that still defies modern replication? Perhaps the answer lies not in stone or gold, but in purpose. When man builds for himself, his work fades. But when he builds for something greater, his work becomes eternal. Today, pilgrims still climb the hills of Jerusalem. They walk where Solomon once walked. They pray before ancient walls, pressing notes of hope between stones carved by forgotten hands. They do not see gold or cedar, only remnants, yet the air still feels sacred. As if somewhere beneath the surface, the heartbeat of the temple still echoes, waiting to rise again. Because legend says one day, the temple will return. Not of human design, but divine. A perfect house of light, descending from heaven, built not by hands, but by God himself. And when that happens, perhaps we'll finally understand what Solomon saw. When he looked at the impossible and said, "Greater than, it will shine like the sun."